Here is everything you need to make your own Linocut stamps from scratch. I'll take you through tools, inks, papers, linoleum of course, and I'll also show you certain things that would be good to have, but you don't need them right away when you're just getting started. First, you'll need a few things to prep your workspace. You need a cutting mat to work on because we're using sharp tools and cutters and you don't want scratches on your table. I've accidentally chipped my cutting mat off a few times like this, so a base of this kind is necessary. If you don't have this, you can use a glass slab or a thick piece of cardboard. But I'd say that you get a proper cutting mat because it's not that expensive and it'll last you a long time. You'll need rags and tissues. Your workspace can get messy and those stains can unknowingly transfer on the paper you're printing your blocks on. So it's best to keep your hands and work area as clean as you can. You'll need a pencil, eraser, ruler, sharpener, all the basic stationery, a sellotape or a washi tape, nothing with a strong adhesive on it, and anything blunt but with a straight edge like this. A credit card, a bone folder, or even a ruler will do. I'll tell you why we need this in just a little bit. Moving on to the main equipment now, starting with linoleum. There are two broad categories of carving blocks. There is traditional linoleum or battleship grey linoleum. You'll generally identify it with its hessian, that is a jute backing. And then there are soft carving blocks like these, which are a rubber-like material. Both have their pros and cons. Traditional linoleum can handle minute carvings better than the soft ones. On the other hand, soft blocks are easier to carve on. There's no good or bad in my opinion, it's more of a personal choice, but I'd always recommend that you try both of these, see what feels nicer to you and pick your linoleum accordingly. There's also Japanese vinyl, but I didn't really enjoy carving on it and haven't used it as much. But my favorite tip of all is using erasers. They feel very similar to carving on soft blocks, but the only downside is the size of erasers tends to be quite limited, but it's a very good starting point. Now you need a tracing paper to help you transfer your design on linoleum. I generally draw on my iPad in Procreate, take a print of that, trace it and transfer it onto my linoleum. But you can even pick an illustration from your sketchbook. It does not have to be digital. You just need something you've drawn that you can trace and transfer from. I use Gateway tracing paper, which is a thicker, good quality paper, but you can literally use any basic tracing paper or even cut out a piece from a baking paper roll. It helps to tape it down to your sketchbook or print using washi tape so it does not move around and all your lines stay aligned. Now we'll transfer the design onto linoleum. This is where the blunt edge item will come in handy. You place your tracing paper on the block, pencil side facing the linoleum, and just scrape it over a few times. Take a little look at it from the corner and once it looks like it's done, lift the paper off. It happens very easily on the soft carving block, but you might have to put in a little more effort for the traditional linoleum. Next are tools. You need a V tool and a U tool. They look like the alphabets V and U when you look at them from the top. A V tool is used for finer details. In this design, for instance, I'm using a V tool to carve the bird's feathers or these textures on the leaves and bark. And then I switch to a U tool to clear out larger chunks like this that I don't want printed, and also to carve out a thicker border around the design. You'll find a lot more sizes in these tools, but I feel like when you're just starting off, you only need two, a small V tool and a medium U tool. I initially picked up a larger set like this, but I realized that for the kind of illustrations I like to carve, I don't really need this large tool. Then there are these two tools that are very close to each other and I end up using only one of them. So 2 out of my 5 tools are almost never used. And these are quite expensive to just be lying around. So I'd say start off with simple tools. Once you get used to the craft and figure out the kind of illustrations you enjoy carving, you can build your tool set one by one since they are all sold individually. You'll also find a set of tools like this, one handle and multiple tips. They work pretty well too, but when you're carving, you often switch between tools and it's a bit inconvenient to keep attaching and removing the tools again and again in the middle of carving. The tip also gets stuck many times, so having single tools is better. I like these ones by File and these by Power Grip. They're amazing, but a bit expensive. And if you're just experimenting and don't want to spend too much, you can go ahead and get simple carving tools from a local art store. Now, when you're done carving, you'll need a cutter at this stage to separate the design from the entire block. I like this simple 12mm cutter, but you can even use an X-Acto knife like this one. You can also choose to carve the rest of the block out using a U-tool, but that turns out to be a bit of a waste. You can save the remaining block to carve more designs later on. Moving on to inks. There are two types again with inks, ink pads and liquid-ish inks. I would highly recommend starting out with ink pads. You're already learning how to carve, which has its own learning curve. With liquid inks, you'll first need a few extra tools like a brayer, a glass slab, a palette knife, some cleaning liquids, and the inks themselves. Setting all of this up takes time, and cleaning it afterwards also takes a while. Then there's the whole process of understanding how the ink behaves, how much ink to roll out, when it's too much, when it's too little. That comes with a bit of intuition. These prints also take longer to dry. And all of this effort is quite worth it because the prints ultimately look beautiful, but sometimes all that extra work before and after the actual carving can feel like a bit much and take away from the motivation. That's why I feel like start off with ink pads till you get the hang of tools and get comfortable with them, which if you're practicing consistently should not take that long, and then you can move on to liquid inks. I still use ink pads for a lot of my work because they are low maintenance and they're flexible. There are some really good ones out there like these by Sukineko, and the other ones that I really like are archival ink pads. I have a huge drawer full of these ink pads in so many colors. Moving on to the paper you'll be printing on. A simple rule to follow when you're shopping for paper is to avoid very rough paper and to also avoid very smooth or glossy paper. You want paper that's mostly on the smoother side but still have a little bit of texture, and a lower GSM, which means a thinner paper works better when you're printing with your hands. You can start with simple cartridge paper or hot pressed watercolor paper. There are also Japanese papers and other papers made specifically for printmaking. They work really well, but they can get a little expensive. When you're starting out, you'll end up making a lot of trial prints from one stamp. Some prints might not come out evenly at first, so you'll try them again. You might test different ink colors or add details with other mediums, and that experimentation is a huge part of the process, and you don't want to be wasting precious paper. Let's talk about pressing. Having a press is of course very useful, but it can get quite pricey. It's also quite bulky, so not everyone has the space for it. And when you're just starting out, you're not really making hundreds of prints, so you don't need a press right away. Using the back of a spoon is quite popular for hand burnishing, but on a whim one day I decided to try a lid and it actually worked better than a spoon, probably because of the larger surface area. You can also get a tool that's called a baron. I have this Japanese baron, which is my favorite. It's quite affordable and works really well. I also have another one that was a little over $30, but I almost never use it. For some reason, it does not work for me. And our print is ready. I like to use the backs of erasers for these tiny embellishments. You can carve out hearts and stars and tiny little things like that, and that comes in really handy to add small details. If you've used ink pads, the print dries almost instantly. When you're using liquid inks, it takes about a week or more to dry, depending on the weather. One last thing that's useful is a strop that's used to sharpen tools. This one's by FlexCut. You can also use a whetstone if you have one. I'll make a dedicated video sometime on how to sharpen tools. So these are all the things you need to get started. Some other things I wish somebody told me when I was new to Linocut are: 1, start with simpler designs. By the time I had taken up Linocut, I already had some experience with drawing, especially on my iPad. So I drew this. I felt like if I could draw it, I could carve it. And it did not work, so I ended up making this flower instead. Knowing how to draw is definitely an advantage, but your first few Linocuts are really about getting used to the tools and materials. Starting with simpler and manageable designs makes the process much easier. Always use a sharp tool and always carve away from your hand. I got a few cuts when I had just started out, and that was my lesson learned. Your block may sometimes look messy when you're carving, but when you actually make the final print, these small imperfections don't really show up. Your first few prints might not turn out like you expected them to, and that's totally normal. I made this mocha pot when I first started carving, and a few months later, I made this one. Even a little bit of consistent practice really leads to a lot of progress. I hope this was helpful, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I have a small set of beginner-friendly designs on my website that you can download for free. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Was that okay? Okay.